Chapter 1. A Regiment is Organized. The camp was in an old field along the railroad just east of the shops. It is now a part of the town of Burlington. Captain Neil W. Ray, 6th North Carolina Regiment. On April 17, 1861, North Carolina Governor John W. Ellis issued a proclamation in reply to President Abraham Lincoln's call for 75,000 troops. Ellis stated in terse language, "This high-handed act of tyrannical outrage is not only in violation of all constitutional law, in utter disregard of every sentiment of humanity and Christian civilization, but is a direct step towards the subjugation of the whole South." Ellis reminded the citizens of North Carolina that their first loyalty was to the state, which protects their homes and their dearest interests. The people of North Carolina should defend their state and their rights of the whole South. It was under this example, handed her by a secession-minded governor, that North Carolina gravitated towards a union with the fledgling Southern Confederacy and war. North Carolina already had a well-organized militia system which had been active since colonial days. A supplement to this system had recently been enacted by the General Assembly. This law established a volunteer corps of not more than 10,000 men who would be subject to the governor's call in case of an emergency. The act provided for brigade, regimental, and company organization and laid the basis for the first 10 regiments organized by the state in the spring of 1861. No one read these acts and proclamations with more interest than Charles Frederick Fisher, president of the North Carolina Railroad Company and prominent resident of Salisbury, the county seat of Rowan County. Fisher, a tall, slender man with a scraggly bronze beard, had long been a controversial figure in state business circles, and was the only son of Charles Fisher and his wife, Christina Beard. He had been born in Salisbury on December 26, 1816, in an atmosphere of comparative wealth. Young Fisher attended classical schools in Salisbury and entered Yale University in 1835, but left college in his freshman year for reasons which are not quite clear. He later engaged in agriculture and mining and was for several years associated with Dr. Austin in the publication of the Western Carolinian in Salisbury. In 1854, Fisher represented Rowan County as a Democrat in the North Carolina Senate. He was elected president of the North Carolina Railroad in 1855, succeeding ex-governor John M. Moorhead. While president of the railroad company, Fisher engaged in the development of the Western North Carolina Railroad, laying track to a point 13 miles east of Morganton by August 1860. His career as a railroad president was a stormy one. His election to the presidency was clouded with charges that the road was run in the interest of the party, the Democratic Party, and that there was gross mismanagement. Jonathan Worth managed to secure an appointment of the committee to investigate these charges in 1858 through 59, but Fisher was never proved guilty. This controversy did not prevent Fisher from being reelected president of the railroad in July 1859 by almost a unanimous vote. Unfortunately, we know little of Fisher's private life, except the fact that he was happily married to Elizabeth R. Caldwell, a daughter of David F. Caldwell. One daughter, Frances Christine, later a famous writer under the name of Christian Reed, was born to this union. Charles Fisher was convinced that someday there would be a rupture between the North and the South. From 1851 on, the thought was always present to him, guiding all his conduct, both in his private affairs and his increasing labors to promote every effort towards the development of the energies of our state and people. When the time came, he was ready. By 1860, he had virtually enrolled many young men from along the line of the North Carolina and Western North Carolina railroads into a volunteer corps which he planned to call either the Piedmont Legion or the Piedmont Rangers. He urged Major Daniel Harvey Hill, superintendent of the Charlotte Military Academy, to take command of this unit and prepare it for possible field service. Hill's appointment as colonel of the 1st North Carolina Regiment when war broke out left Fisher's idea unrealized. Frances Fisher, in describing Hill's promise to her father, wrote, "When offered this command, he, Hill, had hesitated on account of his promise, but my father released him at once from the engagement with himself and urged him to accept the appointment." Fisher then described to assume command of the proposed regiment himself and work towards that purpose. The military fever was strong in the Piedmont, North Carolina, during the turbulent spring of 1861. The Hillsborough Recorder exclaimed, "The military fever prevails to a remarkable degree in this region. Everything partakes of the general excitement." Many companies of the militia were drilling. Officers were offering their units to an anxious state. Fisher realized this and planned accordingly. He promptly went to Charlotte and began to raise a regiment of smiths, carpenters, masons, engineers, etc. A closer look at some of these men is necessary in order to understand the performance of the 6th North Carolina Regiment in its subsequent career. There was James A. Craig to be captain in the regiment, who was 20 years old. Craig was a native of Salisbury and a cadet at the North Carolina Military Institute at Charlotte. Another potential officer, Lewis Rothrock, also came from Rowan County. He was 21 and a farmer by occupation. Richard Graham, also of Rowan, was 19 and also a farmer. Washington E. Currier was another Rowan County farmer, only 18 years old. Daniel M. Bassiner and Theodoric L. Edwards were both mechanics. Moses J. Eagle was a 19-year-old carpenter. Peter Redwine was an 18-year-old blacksmith. The list included farmers, carpenters, blacksmiths, mechanics, even a teacher or two. The average man in Fisher's group had blue eyes, white hair, fair complexion, and was about 5 feet 8 inches tall. His average age was 21 years. Most of the men were farmers by profession, a natural occupation in an area which was yet largely untouched by the Industrial Revolution. A close study of signatures on the enlistment record reveals that most of the men were illiterate. Many well-known names in Piedmont, North Carolina were included. Names like White, Watson, Durham, Basin, Thompson, Tier, Fawcett, Tate, Pace, Fowler, Ray, Mebane, Minus, Pender, Albright, and Dixon. Taken as a group, they might be considered representative of their era and their section of the state. A close study of the records reveals that few of the men were large landowners or owned any slaves. Although it is almost impossible to determine their individual motives for volunteering to fight in Fisher's regiment, it is obvious that the men loved their state and meant to support her in the course she had taken. A good example of the patriotic fervor which was found in Piedmont, North Carolina during the early months was furnished by F.A. Campbell of Alexander County. He gave his consent in writing to Colonel Fisher for the enlistment of his son, William Montreville Campbell, a minor under the age of 21 years, for the war, unless sooner discharged. Campbell's attitude was not unique. In Orange County, 2 companies were rapidly organized and enrolled at Hillsborough as soon as the news of Lincoln's call for troops reached that area. They were the Flat River Guards under Captain Robert F. Webb and the Orange Grays under Captain William G. Freeland. Colonel W. H. Jordan commanded the 27th Regiment of North Carolina Militia, certified that the Flat River Guards numbered 50 rank and file. Its members have uniformed themselves, and the company has been duly organized by the election of officers. Men gave various motives to Colonel Fisher for joining his new regiment. A.K. Sinunton, writing to Fisher from Fort Casual, requested, "A captain's commission in your regiment and commissions for my lieutenants. I think I can muster my company into the regulars. Some of the men I would be willing to discharge, and I can fill their places in a few days after we return to Charlotte. Inform me by return mail with a copy of the rules, etc. They are anxious to get into the field. They will not remain in the fort. They are a good-looking set of men and tolerably well drilled." There is no record of Fisher's answer to this letter. As men began to arrive in Charlotte in response to Fisher's efforts, the question of supplying them with food, uniforms, and weapons became more important. Fisher, like many other prominent men of the day, paid for most of the early expenses of his regiment out of his own pocket. On May 1st, 1861, the firm of Brown, Coffin, and Mock of Salisbury billed Fisher for 67 pairs of blankets. The sum expended was $146.50. The bill specifically stated that the articles were for the 6th North Carolina State Troops. Samuel McDowell Tate, a business friend of Fisher and later an officer in the regiment, acted as the future colonel's agent in this case, and he did on many other occasions. On May 8, 1861, Fisher bought 227 yards of Ossenberg for the sum of $28.20. The goods were brought from E.M. Holt of Graham, Alamance County. 55 pairs of blankets were brought from Oates and Williams on May 18th. The sum expended was $105. On May 22nd, Fisher bought $917.14 worth of uniform material from Meredith Spencer and Company of Richmond, Virginia. The goods included such uniform material as gray tweed, corset, and muslin tallied. Fisher bought $280.32 worth of uniform material, Ossenbergs, plaids, etc., from Holt's store at Hall River in the period from May 25th to June 21st, 1861. Several thousand yards of material were purchased from Holt. Men had to eat well as be clothed. Much meat and flour was accordingly purchased. On May 9, 1861, Fisher's agent, Robert C. Pearson, bought $304.42 worth of shoulders, hams, and middlings from Blackwell and Walker. The purchase included 2,255 pounds of meat. W. H. Alexander sold 1,700 pounds of bacon, 38 sacks of flour, and 35 bushels of meal to Fisher in the period from April 23rd to June 3rd, 1861. The total cost of this material was $409.81. It was well that Fisher was a man of wealth, for the cost of raising and equipping a regiment was high. A typical letter received by Fisher during this period was sent to him by Meredith Spencer and Company of Richmond. It advised, "Enclosed we hand bill of goods for military bought by Mr. J. C. Turner, Fisher's agent, for your April amount bill, including cash and freight, $917.14. Goods have been shipped to you to Salisbury. We have drawn on you at 5 days as authorized by Mr. Turner. We have also said to Mr. Turner that if he could send us gold for an amount bill, we would take off a discount of 8%. Should you determine to send gold, advise us by telegraph, and we will withdraw the discount. We shall be glad to fill your further orders here." Colonel Fisher attempted to obtain remuneration from the state for at least a part of his expenditures. He wrote Quartermaster General Lawrence O. B. Branch at Raleigh to this end. Branch acknowledged receipt of Fisher's letter and then politely stated that this department is not authorized to furnish supplies to any troops until they have been mustered into service. Branch assured Fisher that his troops would be furnished with all the supplies coming under cognizance of this department, immediately after the regiment was mustered into service. The problem of troop pay was an interesting one, and one difficult of solution. On July 3rd, Quartermaster General Branch wrote A.C. Myers, Quartermaster General of the Confederate States, to ask about the pay of volunteers and state troops. Branch's inquiry also covered the supply of troops, the burden which Fisher had been paying out of his own pocket. Myers answered on July 5th that volunteers are paid by the Confederate States from the date of their muster into state service on the transfer of the muster rolls to the Confederate service, and when they have not been mustered into the state service, they are paid from the date of the order directing them to proceed to any destination by the War Department. North Carolina Adjutant General John F. Hoke was drawn into the controversy. He bluntly stated that the Confederate government had to pay North Carolina troops when they were received into Confederate service. The Confederate government must also issue all necessary supplies on proper muster rolls, requisitions, and returns. Hoke concluded his letter by revealing the basic weakness of the Confederacy. No officer is allowed to make expenditures on account of the state for troops in the service of the Confederate States, or to issue to them any supplies belonging to the state without authority from this office. The North Carolina Adjutant General had a great deal of control over pay and supply of the state troops and volunteers, and even decided who would bear the expense of maintaining the troops. Amidst all this controversy, Fisher was not forgotten. On July 10th, Branch, under orders from Governor Henry T. Clark, paid him the sum of $5,000 as reimbursement for raising and equipping of the 6th Regiment. This relieved the strain on Fisher's personal finances. On June 1, 1861, the regiment, still in the process of organization, was moved from Charlotte to Company Shops, modern Burlington, on the North Carolina Railroad. Neil W. Ray, later a captain in the regiment, said, "The camp was in an old field along the railroad just east of the shops. It is now a part of the town of Burlington." The men drilled in the fields along the railroad tracks throughout the month of June. As they drilled, they often saw trainloads of troops passing from states farther south. The passing troops cheered with cries of "On to Virginia," which were answered with hearty responses by the men of the 6th. Much had to be done before the regiment was ready for the field. Officers had to be appointed, and military equipment had to be issued to the men. Furthermore, the men needed a great deal of drilling to prepare them for the battlefield. The appointment of officers for the first 10 regiments of the North Carolina State Troops were made after lengthy consultation between Governor Ellis and a special military board, which had been created for the purpose by an act of the North Carolina General Assembly. This board consisted of 3 men, one of whom at least shall be skilled in military affairs. The members of the board were appointed by the governor and would continue in office for the duration of his term, or until removed by him. It was the duty of the military board to advise with the governor relative to the appointment of all military and naval officers, or such other matters respecting naval or military affairs as the General Assembly shall assign to said board. The board was directed to keep accurate records and accounts of its activities, for the first officer of the board was established as an ex officio aide to the governor, with the rank and pay of a colonel in the Army of the Confederate States of America. Other provisions of the act which created the board concerned the salary of the chief officer of the board, the right of the governor to convene said board from the time and whenever he may deem proper, the filling of vacancies in the board, and the salaries of members of the board besides the principal officer, who shall receive $3 per day for each day they are actually engaged in the service of the state, and the same mileage as is now allowed members of the General Assembly. The act was ratified by the General Assembly on May 10th and signed by Governor Ellis on the following day. The board, which consisted of ex-Governor Warren Winslow as president, Major James A.J. Bradford, and Haywood W. Gilling, met at the Executive Mansion in Raleigh and proceeded to business. On May 23rd, the board appointed Charles F. Fisher as colonel of the 6th North Carolina Regiment. William T. Dortch, Speaker of the North Carolina House of Commons, was appointed lieutenant colonel. Robert M. McKinney, James W. Wilson, Junius L. Hill, A.K. Simpson, and P.A. York were appointed captains. Dr. A.M. Nesbitt of Salisbury was appointed surgeon. Colonel Fisher's rank dated from May 16th. The captain's date of rank began on May 15th. During the last days of May, the military board completed the appointments for the regiment. Dozens of men were appointed to the ranks of captain, first lieutenant, second lieutenant, and third lieutenant. Most of these men received their rank and seniority from May 16, 1861. When the organization of the regiment was completed, the roster included Colonel Charles F. Fisher, Lieutenant Colonel W. T. Dortch, Major Charles E. Lightfoot, Adjutant H. B. Lowry, A. M. Nesbitt, surgeon, J. A. Caldwell, and C. A. Henderson, assistant surgeons, N. E. Scales, assistant quartermaster, and W. H. Alexander, assistant commissionary sergeant. Company A, Robert McKinney as captain, S.S. Kirkland, first lieutenant, J. Calder Turner, second lieutenant, A. M. Kirkland, Jr., second lieutenant. Company B, Robert F. Webb, captain, W. K. Parrish, first lieutenant, W. E. McMahon, second lieutenant, W. P. Mangum, Jr., second lieutenant. Company C, W. J. Freeland, captain, W. J. Durhams, first lieutenant, W. G. Guess, second lieutenant, E. Turner, Jr., second lieutenant. Company D, S. McDowell Tate, captain, D. C. Pearson, first lieutenant, N. W. Ray, second lieutenant, John Carson, Jr., second lieutenant. Company E, Isaac E. Avery, captain, A. C. Avery, first lieutenant, John H. Burns, second lieutenant, John A. McPherson, Jr., second lieutenant. Company F, James W. Wilson, captain, R. F. Carter, first lieutenant, B. F. White, second lieutenant, H. C. Dixon, Jr., second lieutenant. Company G, James A. Craig, captain, B. R. Smith, first lieutenant, J. T. Roseborough, second lieutenant. Company H, A. A. Mitchell, captain, L. H. Walker, first lieutenant, J. A. Lee, second lieutenant, J. T. Anderson, Jr., second lieutenant. Company I, R. W. York, captain, M. W. Page, first lieutenant, W. B. Allen, second lieutenant, M. B. Barbie, Jr., second lieutenant. Company K, J. W. Lee, captain, J. S. Vincent, first lieutenant, Samuel Crawford, second lieutenant, Samuel Roney, Jr., second lieutenant. Before it went to the field, each North Carolina regiment needed a colonel, a lieutenant colonel, a major, an adjutant, one surgeon, and two assistant surgeons, one assistant quartermaster, an assistant commissary sergeant, and 10 companies of troops. Each company had a captain, one first lieutenant, 2 second lieutenants, and on average from 50 to 80 men. Each regiment was also equipped with chaplain, appointed by the military board in case of the first 10 regiments of the state troops. The 6th Regiment drilled at company shops throughout the month of June 1861. Much preparation was necessary before the men could take the field. Many problems had to be faced before the regiment could function as an efficient fighting unit. Fisher was still raising troops for his regiment. One company, the Cedar Fork Rifles, came in from Wake County. Another, the Chatham Rifles, came in from Chatham County. On May 21st, Fisher wrote Richard Wyatt York, captain of the Cedar Fork Rifles, "I beg you to excuse me to your company for not going up today. I have been absolutely and unavoidably detained here today on official duties, which you know cannot be neglected, and quite unable to get away, I am obliged to go west tonight on the same matters. I am called upon to present the names of captains and officers for appointment. I believe no more short-term volunteers will be received, so the governor says until the state troops are filled up, so your question would be as between myself and some other chief. I will come down on an engine Thursday so as to be sure to see you and the company. If you are yet determined, send me your names of officers by morning train to report for appointment at once, or wait to see me as you please." Wyatt B. Allen wrote Colonel Fisher on May 28th that the Chatham Rifles will be here Thursday at Morrisville, Wake County. The Rifles were the only organized militia unit in Chatham County, although another was being raised, and will be organized in a few days, and it will be known as the Mount Pleasant Riflemen. Allen wrote Fisher, "If you have received a request from any of our company to make some preparations to take the ladies of the Cedar Fork Sewing Society to Cary next Wednesday, you will please not do so on that day. But any preparation or accommodation shown them on next Friday, to which day the party has been postponed, will, I assure you, be duly appreciated." The sponsoring of social affairs was important to the raising of Confederate troops. It reflected the social temper of the times. Fisher had a problem with William T. Dortch, his lieutenant colonel. Although he was motivated by patriotic fervor, Dortch expressed some unwillingness to retain his position with the regiment. On June 1st, he wrote Fisher saying that his request for transfer had been denied. Dortch admitted that matters must remain as they are. "I was willing to yield to my position, and am now, if your engagements could have been carried out." Dortch remained with the regiment for the moment, and even had himself fitted for a uniform towards the end of June. The question of Dortch's position with the regiment would remain temporarily unresolved. As the month of June progressed, Fisher continued to face problem of supplying the regiment with medicines, food, and uniforms. Dr. Nesbitt and his assistant needed many medical supplies to cure the diseases common to rural boys camped together for the first time. From May 15th to June 1st, Fisher purchased many medicines from the North Carolina firm of E.W. Hutchinson and Company. Among these articles were 1 vial sol iodide potash, 1 bottle ointment for recruit, 1 box of pills, 5 bottles of salt, 8 ounces laudanum, 1 bottle of cod liver oil, 1 tress, 1 vial medicine for recruit, 2 bottles of arrowroot, 3 prescriptions for pills for recruit, etc., some paregoric, some quinine, and another prescription completed the list, which must have been as distasteful as it was necessary for the men. Fisher expended the sum of $12.80 for this medicine. More uniform material had to be procured to clothe the growing number of recruits at Alamance. On June 3rd, Colonel Fisher paid $11.80 for 294 yards of jean material. This material was purchased from F.H. Fry's, a local merchant. Many merchants, realizing that Colonel Fisher's regiment was a possible gold mine, solicited the colonel's business. G. Rosenthal wrote Colonel Fisher from Yanceyville on June 18th. Captain A. Mitchell told me last week that you wanted to buy flannel undershirts and drawers. I have a lot of very good ones, such as our volunteers here in Caswell County received, consisting of about 70 shirts and 50 pair of drawers on hand, and offer you the same at 75 cents and $1 apiece. The quality is as good as can be expected for the price, and a good many of the shirts sell at $1.25 and $1.50. Other merchants plagued Colonel Fisher with requests for payment. Conweiler and Bros, a Charlotte clothing firm, wrote Colonel Fisher on June 26 requesting payment for 50 pair gray blankets purchased on April 30th. The bill involved amounted to $100. While lavishing thousands of dollars worth of equipment on his men, Fisher did not neglect his personal needs, retaining his highly paid position with the North Carolina Railroad until he left for Virginia. Fisher was able to go off to war like a wealthy gentleman. On June 4th, he purchased a large wall tent for himself and paid the sum of $50 in cash for it. He engaged O.S. Baldwin of 38 Market Street in Wilmington to make a uniform for him, resplendent even to special eagle shoulder straps. Fisher purchased 6 sets of knives and forks and 4 sets of spoons for himself and his staff on June 26th. The colonel, used to luxury in the civilian life, was determined to go to Virginia in style. On June 1st, he wrote the following note to James C. Smith. I promise to pay James C. Smith on order $125 for the hire of Randall, who goes with me as a servant into the campaign in Virginia. I shall clothe and take care of him under the circumstances as to health and general safety. During the month of June, Fisher continued to supply food for his men. Early in the month, R.W. Griffith was paid $300 for 2,400 pounds of bacon. H. Witherspoon, Fisher's agent at Cedar Fork, Wake County, wrote, I have purchased some 300 pounds of bacon, and as I shall be ready to move any time next week, you will please let me know when you will take us on, and where. The Company I, Cedar Fork Rifles, Captain R.W. York commanding, will expect their bounty. North Carolina troops, including the 6th Regiment, had a more varied diet in the early days of the Civil War than is generally supposed. Articles at the Wilmington Railroad Department awaiting shipment to troops in Virginia in the spring of 1861 included bacon, flour, hard bread, beans, rice, coffee, sugar, vinegar, candles, soap, salt, molasses, fish, pickles, dried fruit, corn, cattle, lard, and meal. This list shows the average Confederate soldier ate very well, at least in the beginning. The most important equipment problem faced by the 6th Regiment was the matter of weapons and military hardware. The equipping of the first 10 regiments of state troops was under the control of the Colonel of Ordnance for the state of North Carolina. Beginning on May 29th, this official issued military equipment to the regiment. On that date, Captain Craig of Company G was issued 1 pair of bullet molds, 1 screwdriver for extracting unfired cartridges from muskets, and 1 clasp. On June 17th, the Ordnance Department shipped Fisher 200 rifled muskets, 600 pattern 1822 muskets, 800 barrel wipers, 800 screwdrivers, 800 spare cones, 800 spring vices, 80 ball screws, 40 arm chests, 800 cartridge boxes with belts, 800 cap pouches, and 800 bayonet scabbards. On June 28th, Fisher received 200 rifled muskets, 200 wipers, 800 screwdrivers, 200 spare cones, 20 spring vices, 20 ball screws, and 10 arm chests for transporting muskets. On June 17th, Fisher was furnished with 82 altered muskets, which cost the state $600. Company G received 64 blankets, 20 knapsacks, 83 haversacks, 83 canteens, 84 cartridge boxes, 84 cartridge box belts, 84 belt plates, and 84 bayonet scabbards during the month of June. Another company which might be considered representative of the rest of the regiment was Captain Richard Watt York's Company I. These men received 81 cartridge boxes, cap boxes, bayonet scabbards, and belts, 81 shirts, 61 coats, 12 pairs of pants, 12 pairs of shoes, 4 camp kettles, 81 knapsacks, and 81 haversacks during the month of June. While the regiment was at Raleigh immediately before departing for Virginia, the men received 20,000 rifle musket cartridges with caps, 7,550 musket cartridges, and 12,000 cartridges with caps, received from Captain W. W. Pierce. In early June, Fisher's sister Christine presented a fine silken flag to the regiment. This flag, beautifully made of blue silk, carried the state seal, which represented two women standing by a horn of plenty with the words, "To be rather than to seem," written below. This was a significant motto for the regiment to uphold. For most of the men of the 6th Regiment, life went on at company shops. Set to the tune of drum beats, the troops, for assembling the men in the morning, peas in a trencher, the beat for breakfast, roast beef, the signal for dinner, the surgeon's call, beat for the men who were sick, the assembly, the beat to form by company, the color, the signal for formation by battalion, the long roll, the signal for falling in under arms, the retreat, to be beat in the evening for the purpose of reading the orders of the day, the tattoo, the signal for lights out in the evening. One of the men in the 6th wrote to his family in Chatham County in early July. His letter, typical of the soldier's life at company shops, carries the homesick protest of the Confederate soldier away from home and friends for the first time. Dear brother, I take this privilege of writing you a few lines to let you know that I am well, and hoping when these few lines come to hand, they may find you and sister and all the rest well. I should like very much to see you all and to talk with you, but I don't know when we shall get the chance, for we are not allowed to go to the shops without a permit, and we are not allowed to miss a drill without a furlough, sickness, or permit. We are under tight rules, and you don't know how tight they are. I wish I could see you, and then I could tell you what I thought of camp life. It is very tight rules and confined. We have got our guns, and have returned our muskets, and got rifle muskets. They look much better, but I haven't tried them. We haven't gotten any clothes since we have been up here. Some of us have got shoes we haven't got but $15 apiece since we volunteered. Tom is well, except his arm, where he is vaccinated. I've been vaccinated twice, and now my arm is very sore. We have meat and bread and coffee, and sometimes molasses, and sometimes other things when we pay for them ourselves. There are several here today from Cedar Fork. There is right smart of sickness in this camp. We are crowded in the tent. There is 6 of us, and our guns, and bedding, and clothing, satchels, etc. This letter reflects the age-old need for the company of women. I wish I could see the girls about home if I could come to old Chatham. I would hug them as hard as ever I did. For when I was down there, before I hugged them, and they hugged so good, I want to hug them again. This soldier's company was the skirmish company, forcing him to stand guard every day. It takes 6 from our company every day. The letter closes with the sad wish that, if we meet no more on earth, I hope we meet in heaven, where parting will be no more. Many ladies' aid societies throughout central North Carolina assisted the regiment by making much-needed clothing for the men. Fisher expressed his appreciation to the ladies of Hillsborough for their valuable services in a letter to the Hillsborough recorder. He was lavish in his praise, stating that the ladies are rendering to the state a service only second to that of a soldier in the field, and deserve consideration accordingly. The end of June saw many more appointments in the 6th North Carolina Regiment. Alfred A. Mitchell was appointed captain of Company K on June 17th. Levi H. Walker was appointed a first lieutenant, while Quentin T. Anderson and Jerry A. Lee were appointed second lieutenants on the same day. William Preston Mangum, son of ex-United States Senator Willie P. Mangum, was appointed a second lieutenant in Company B on June 27th. Samuel S. Kirkland was appointed captain of Company K on the same day. All these appointments were made by the military board at Raleigh in accordance with the established policy of naming officers for the state troops. The military board issued another order in connection with the 6th Regiment. On June 28th, it directed that the quartermaster and postmaster general be informed that the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th regiments of the state troops will rendezvous immediately at Gettysburg, and that he be requested to fit them out expeditiously as possible. These were ominous words. The great adventure was ready to begin.